I'll get us started. So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today in our webinar, all about 5 ways to prioritize SEL and STEM in the classroom. So I'll give a little bit more information on Unruly Studios later, but my name is Lauren and I'm the marketing lead here at Unruly Studios. We're all about mixing STEM and play and SEL, and we believe that STEM is and play is just a natural conduit for social emotional learning. So I'm really excited to hear about Monica's tips, and then when she's all done, then I'll give you some more information about us at Unruly Splats, and I can show you a couple of our game examples as well that we use for SEL.
Wonderful. Well, I am just so excited to be back here with you all today. I was able to join the wonderful folks at Unruly Splats to talk about all the ways that you can prioritize STEM and think about different things when you are looking at play and distance learning. And so today we're taking a spin and thinking about 5 ways to prioritize SEL in the STEM classroom. And if we haven't met before, my name is Monica Burns. I'll put my info up there in case you have questions or anything like that after today. I'm a former New York City public school teacher. So I taught in New York City public schools. Sometimes I awkwardly point over my, my shoulder this way in the direction of New York City when I say that. I'm not sure if you've taught elementary school now or you've taught elementary school in the past. I'm constantly talking with my hands or modeling what I'm doing at the same time. And the same thing goes when I'm here on video calls with you all. Now, I am very passionate about bringing in STEM into the classroom. I was lucky enough to teach at a magnet school for environmental stewardship. So we were always thinking about science topics from a few different angles, and we're able to go one-to-one with devices and think about technology integration in lots of different ways. And so this topic of SEL is really near and dear to my heart. And I'm excited for today's topic to share some ways and ideas with you as we go through our conversation together this afternoon. And I'm hoping that you will jump into the chat area as well as we're talking, maybe share some ideas or some things that come to mind as we're looking at the ways to prioritize SEL in the STEM classroom. So let's go ahead and jump right in. I want to share with you some of our goals for our time together today. So first up, we'll talk a bit about what it means to value social emotional learning. Prioritization or prioritizing things really is taking that time to place value and say, this is important to us. This is something that we want to make sure we've made a commitment to. And that's what we'll start off talking about today, breaking down exactly what we mean when we say SEL, but then also how it fits into things that we value and really prioritize. We'll look at how to identify moments where SEL can shine in a STEM environment. And although I'll share some big ideas with you today, I also have some very specific things to consider. So questions, prompts, ideas that you can take as they are, or that you can tailor to your own specific learning environment. So you know your kids, you know what they need. So hopefully this will give you a foundation to really customize things for your group. We'll also look at activities you can tailor to any classroom or instructional model. And that's kind of my way of saying, if you're all together, if you're far apart, if you're in a hybrid learning environment or doing concurrent instruction, we've got you covered today. And you'll hear me kind of weave in and out of examples as we look through some of these ideas, really because I know that you may be in a situation that's different than someone else joining us today. And you might be in a situation that's different than it was 6 weeks ago, and it might even change again, right, in another 6 weeks. So as we are working through some times of big change, we want to make sure that you have resources and ideas that are relevant, actionable, and that you can use in any type of model that you might currently be in. So let's keep going here and talk a little bit about this idea of SEL. So SEL, right, that acronym from the title for today is our social emotional learning. Now, the term social emotional learning, and when we look at it and really break it down, I always come back to this framework. And so the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning defines SEL as the process through which children and adults understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. Now, I'm confident that these things are already happening in your classrooms, in your school, right, in your interaction with your students. Maybe it's your students in your classroom or students that you support in your role as a media specialist, instructional coach, school or building leader. And so today, when we talk about SEL, it's not about what all these things are, but how to prioritize these things within the STEM classroom. So if you are having lots of activities that fall underneath that STEM category, and you'll hear from Lauren some activities and resources you might want to dive into before we finish up today, this is really an opportunity for us to take a step back, think about some of the ways in which we can really prioritize these things in the midst of specific learning activities. So hopefully it's part about building that muscle within ourselves to say, oh, I can identify this moment, or this would be a good time to pause. Or if I really am committed to having students manage their emotions, this might be a great time for us to have a discussion in the midst of this other activity. So the Castle framework includes self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, responsible skills, and responsible decision making. And I'm going to talk about some of these kind of key words as we go through today. So I wanted to make sure to give a shout out to their website. It's kind of small, but on the center of the screen. So they have fantastic resources as well, really a go-to place when you're talking about SEL and social emotional learning. So if you are interested in this topic and growing in your own professional knowledge around SEL, that's a really great place to go to for rubrics, for frameworks, and for more information on what this really means when we talk about this term, so that as we dive into things today, like the way SEL connects to STEM activities, right? You've got a little bit of a foundation to build on from our quick overview now. But if there's a professional goal you have to dive deeper into SEL and STEM, or one or the other, right, you might head over to their site. So as we talk today about SEL in action, so in the midst of the STEM activities that you might develop for students or the units of study that you are facilitating, there's a few things we want to think about in action. So in the midst of this lesson, as we're planning for a new unit, we really want to identify the purpose. Why is it that this is a priority for you? And it might be because you professionally, your school has made a commitment, you've observed certain things that make you realize the importance of bringing SEL into different learning environments. So identifying and then rooting this in your purpose, your goals that might be completely unrelated to STEM is a great way to really have that personal buy-in for making this commitment. You'll also want to consider having a plan, right? This is not something that we want to do in an arbitrary way or as an afterthought, but as part of your own strategic planning for any type of lesson that you have. So if you know that you have a big unit coming up, right, you can step back and say, where are these moments going to be where I can thoughtfully pull in some of the types of activities we talk about today, or some of the ones you might find as your wheels are spinning about this particular topic. Now, SEL in action requires some buy-in, and not just from us, right? If you're here today, you're probably at that place already where you value this and see the importance. But having buy-in in a larger community sometimes comes down to just clearly communicating your why. I know sometimes if I'm extra busy or moving a little fast, I just assume everyone's kind of on the same page as me or thinks that the same things are important. But we all know that that's not always the case. And sometimes we have to take a step back and say, this is why I'm committed to this. This is what I've seen. This is what I know to be important. So part of that goal of having SEL as a priority for you might even include having that buy-in in your community, which could be simply saying, this is why, right? This is why I'm committed to this. So part of that is the commitment with a larger school community, as well as with you. Being committed to bringing SEL in the STEM classroom involves a level of consistency, right? Coming back and reflecting and thinking about how well things are working or where you want to make a few tweaks. It also includes this being integrated. So, not something that just is happening, but is thoughtfully placed in to your unit of study or to your lessons. So it's not a side note or an afterthought or something that just happened at the same time, but it's integrated within so that you are pausing to have an activity where students reflect on where they're at with their growth mindset, so that you know you are not letting the bell ring, but you're carving out those last 5 minutes for some reflection and discussion questions, because you are prioritizing those moments where you know you want to bring SEL into the equation. And of course, this all comes back to really placing value on SEL, because you know that it has an impact on all the things we want students to be able to do, right? If students don't feel like they are safe or listened to, or that others are respecting their perspective, right, they won't feel as valued within that space. And it's going to build some barriers for their academic success as well. So, as we go into our 5 ways to prioritize SEL in the STEM classroom, I will take you through a few activities, as I mentioned, that I'm hoping that you will tailor to your own groups. But before we dive into the list, now that we've laid that foundation for SEL and some of the reasons to be thoughtful and prioritize it within the STEM classroom, I'd love to hear from you in the chat area. And you can either do the drop down of all panelists, which is just me and Lauren here, or you can do all panelists and attendees. And I'd love to hear from you. Do you have a favorite activity? Do you even have a favorite prompt or question you like to bring to a group of students anytime that you know you want to pull in some of the social emotional learning component? So I'm going to come out of full screen here so that I can see the chat, because as much as I love having it open this way, sometimes it gets rid of my chat there. So let me know there in the chat area. Is this something that you've tried before? Do you have a favorite activity or prompt that you've used? I'll get quiet for a moment as you think and type into the chat area.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm keeping my eye on the chat too, so I can read out some ideas that everyone has. I'm super excited to hear what people are already doing to spark SEL conversations and just getting students talking about their feelings, or like Monica mentioned, just kind of sparking questions.
Mhm. So morning meetings, thanks for sharing that, Carly. Yep, I see that too, Jennifer. Yeah, so morning meetings, using that as a time to discuss. And I'm going to try and get back here into full mode. I hate turning on and off the captions like that, but I know that here with Google Slides. So if you see some other things, Lauren, feel free to shout them out.
For sure. We have Natalie, who also said that she uses morning meetings to encourage various SEL discussions. Carly, have you filled a bucket today? Oh, I'm curious about what that means.
I love the filling the bucket. That's a great book. So you'll head over to your ebook or Amazon cart to find that one. It's a wonderful book, right? All about filling our bucket, and if we're filling other people's buckets and not taking away from them, that's a great first week of school book. But it's also a great we're having a tough week book, and we need to read that all together as a class. I love using that vocabulary, and that's something that you can bring into your discussions with students as well.
We have a bunch more too. So we have asking a student what zone they're in from zone curriculum, red, blue, green, or yellow. That's from Anastasia. And that's a great idea. And Jennifer also said, we have a great conversation yesterday about strengths and how we can use our strengths to be resilient. I love that. We're going to talk about resilience a lot in my part, but
Mhm.
And then Anna said she likes to use continuums for students to self-assess.
Perfect. So all of this vocabulary, right? These vocabulary words that you're using about regulation and self-assessment and having students take a step back and say, this is how I'm feeling, or this is hard today, right? Are all the kinds of things that we are looking at today as we break down these ways to prioritize SEL in the STEM classroom. So let's go ahead and jump in, but please use that chat area to put in any questions you have, any connections to your own work or a favorite resource. That's a space for you all, right? To share some things as we go through. So, way number one, the first one on our list is embracing a growth mindset. Now, this term growth mindset is used in lots of different ways, and we hear it from our own professional growth or trying something new. And we know that it's something that we can bring into conversations with students as well. So, if you're familiar with Carol Dweck's work, I put mindset referencing her book right here. So this is kind of paraphrasing or summing up this big idea. And there's lots of resources you can find with her talking about these pieces that you can dive into as well. But it's the belief that time, effort, and energy can help you become better at something. So it's not saying that you are naturally perfect at this thing, whatever that thing might be, and only those people who get it the first time are the ones that can do it. But it's really about instilling that belief that time, effort, and energy can help you become better at something. And I'm sure, just like me, right, you as a grown up have had moments of struggling with a growth mindset, whether I know if I'm following a recipe and it's just not working and I think I'm not cut out to do this, right, or whatever that moment might be. Your students, especially trying lots of new things, especially in a STEM classroom, which may involve different activities that are new to them or something where they're confident in other parts of their day and now all of a sudden something's a little frustrating for them. So having that growth mindset and embracing that in your conversations with students is important. Now, one thing to consider here when we talk about growth mindset and action and how this connects to the STEM classroom is there's a difference between something that is challenging and something that is frustrating. And so as you are having conversations with students, observing students, checking in with groups that might be working together, finding that line is going to be different for different students. But it's something to be mindful of. It doesn't mean that we're swooping in to save the day by any means. It's just that we're noticing when we're about to get to that very frustrated, shut down piece, how can we pull it back so that this becomes something that is challenging and motivating? And having that on our mind while we are observing, having conversations with students, being ready to say, ooh, that's someone who is about to be more frustrated than challenged, we can come in and have conversations about putting in that time, putting in the effort, looking at something a little bit differently, and really valuing that struggle that comes along with the growth. Now, another thing that you might model for students or pull into conversations or even find a couple read alouds that might have characters who are tackling some of these same issues is examining self-talk. Now, self-talk is when we say, I can't do this, or I'm not someone who can do this thing. And hearing that in our minds, right, it becomes a reality. And students might walk into that with some some experiences before they've even come to you that make them feel like they're not going to be able to do something. If they've been unsuccessful at accomplishing a very particular goal in the past, right, they might feel like they are not up to the challenge. So if we can model for students what this looks like, similar to how we might model a think aloud, like, ooh, I think I'm going to do this, or I'm wondering if this will work, right? We model that as a best practice as educators, but if we can model self-talk as well, that's something that may benefit students who are coming in with some preconceived ideas on what they can and cannot do into the STEM classroom. So things you might say are, oh, I've tried this before and it's really hard. I wonder if I can do this again. Or I feel like I want to give up, but I know that I need to keep pushing through. And if kids are modeling, or if your kids are seeing you model that struggle, right, they can help them examine their own self-talk and kind of push that aside when they come to a task that might be challenging. Now, if you are noticing that students are working through challenges, working hard to accomplish certain goals, you might want to do a timeout, right? Let's pause for a discussion here and reflect a bit on what we're in the midst of right now. This could be a combination of praise, like I noticed how hard these folks are working on one corner of the classroom, or I was just talking to this student about how they were starting to get frustrated and overcame whatever it is that they were tackling. So, pausing for discussion in the midst of an activity is another way to point out, acknowledge, and share strategies that relate to growth mindset, which is an SEL component of having students really think through what their perspective is, perhaps empathize with someone else who's struggling when something's easy for them, and vice versa. Now, next up on our list is building relationships and working together. Both important things when we talk about SEL in the STEM classroom. And just like all five of the strategies on our list are things that we know are skill building that extends way beyond a traditional K 12 classroom and that is needed in all facets of a student's life, both inside and outside of a classroom. So, when it comes to building relationships, this is something that you can integrate right into a STEM classroom's lesson. So, early on, when we got started here, I talked about that purposeful planning, integrating, making a commitment to these big ideas we're talking about today. So, this includes carving out time for the purpose of building relationships, which will help students then dive deeper into their working together moments where your STEM goals might really shine. So, this could include icebreakers that have nothing to do with the actual task that you are working on that day, but will facilitate conversations, kids getting to know each other, taking down their guard a little bit as they get ready to try something that might be very new for them. You might also decide to include some sharing activities where students share stories, share favorite things. We started off today, right, sharing our favorite Halloween candy. So, that idea of building a relationship by sharing what's important to you can help students understand other perspectives, understand that if someone's never heard of that Halloween candy before, well, tell me all your favorite ones then, because maybe I've never heard of any of your favorite Halloween candies before. So this becomes an opportunity to build relationships, strengthen bonds that when we go into our STEM lessons, kids are more bought into their group mentality because they have a better understanding of who they're working with. And just because they've sat next to that person all year long doesn't mean that they really have that relationship with them. Just because they know their name and where they sit at the lunchroom doesn't quite feel the same, right, as building a relationship in preparation for working together. Now, this all allows us to look beyond the task at hand. So, looking at the bigger picture here for a sense of community so that students will have that sense of buy in as they get ready to go into the particular activity for the day. So, carving out time that is separate, say, from the actual hands on experience that kids are about to do, rooted in your academic or your STEM goals that you've identified, is something that you might want to consider here. Building relationships can be really a foundation for kids learning about each other and being ready in the right headspace to jump into the content for that day. So, all of these are components that you can tailor to your particular group of students. And the same thing goes here as we talk about compromises and discussions, something that is definitely important when students are working together. And if you are committed to prioritizing SEL in your STEM classroom, right, you know that there is a big value in having kids prepared to talk, prepared to hear, prepared to share, and then move forward, no matter what happens during all those other steps in between. So, when it comes to this social awareness that is required when we are compromising or hosting discussions, we have the opportunity for students to see different perspectives, value different perspectives, and share their different perspective. Now, compromise is important whenever students are working together towards a common goal. And having these compromises and discussions throughout the process come right back to the big SEL goals of learning how to empathize, being socially aware and noticing where something's not right with our group dynamic. What do we need to do to make sure we're really hearing everyone and then taking action based on what we've heard? So you might decide that you build in time within a set project. Say you're working with students over the course of a week and they're developing inventions or simple machines to tackle a problem you've identified. Well, you might say, you know what, it's Tuesday afternoon. Let's take a moment for everyone to do a check in and share where they see us going next, right? Share with your group members what you think you should do next to keep moving. And students can hear those different perspectives, come to a conclusion, right, based on that discussion. Now, social awareness also includes helping others, and not just helping others when they ask for help, but noticing when other members of a group are in need of help, maybe even before they realize that they need help. Now, when we are in, say, an obstacle course and we're doing something where kids are all outside and someone needs to pass the rope to the next person or help them to make sure they don't fall off of the side, right, of the playground. Well, helping others and anticipating the help that they need is a little bit more tangible, right? We kind of see it right there. Like that classmate's going to fall if I don't pass them the next thing, or I need to make sure they have this in order to be successful. But when we're working on projects, especially during a remote learning environment, we might not be able to anticipate those needs with the same cues that we would have if everyone's sitting around together in a circle, sharing desks or leaning over computer screens as they talk. So you might want to build in more time for students to share when they need help, something that has been hard for them this week, and give them an opportunity to pair up. So if you already have, say, a peer feedback routine in an English language arts classroom, you can transfer some of that, those strategies and the logistics that you use to partner students up, hold them accountable for giving feedback to one another on their persuasive writing pieces. You can pull that in here to a STEM classroom to say, all right, what do we need here? Who needs what? Where can we buddy up? And giving them the capacity to do this may require you carving out time specifically for students to ask for feedback or solicit help during a project. Now, making compromises is easier said than done. And I'm sure if you are deciding where to go on a weekend or deciding what to do for dinner one night of the week, right? You know that making compromises is part of all of our everyday lives. But making compromises also includes the ability to share an opinion, to feel safe and comfortable to say, I'm not sure if that is right, or I don't know if that's what I want us to do right now as we move forward in this project. So, giving students an opportunity to share opinions might include giving them sentence starters that are appropriate for your particular grade level or relate to the academic task that you have. So, you might decide to have students share opinions that way. You might use a space where they can post virtual sticky notes and share what it is that they are most excited about. And this becomes an opportunity to prep kids to make a case for their position as they're getting ready to compromise with their group. Now, we know that group dynamics when kids are working towards a task can vary greatly, and you might group students based on group dynamics sometimes as well. And so knowing that if you have students that might be more vocal about sharing their opinions, working with students who are not always so vocal but have just as valuable things to contribute, you might have some different ways for students to share their opinions to help them make compromises as they move forward in a project or activity together. Now, sharing opinions is great, but you also need to be able to hear the opinions of others. So you might decide that as part of that next step, you've practiced sharing how students feel, are advocating for themselves, that they also take that time to hear the opinions of others and take a moment to really bring that in to themselves before they give their opinion right back. So you might develop a routine for your group that's age appropriate or subject matter appropriate that includes students sharing to a quiet listener and that listener having to pause and wait before they respond as well. So there's different types of ways you might introduce that sort of activity to students, but if you place it in the midst of a STEM lesson, it's not just something separate, but it's an important component of what kids are working on as they have a particular goal that they are addressing. Now, the next one on our list can go along with making compromises because we know that sometimes compromises bring up some emotions, especially if things don't go in the direction that we're hoping that they're going in. But before we get into this one on our list, I'd love to hear from you in the chat area. Are there things that you do now to help students with their discussions, to help them with compromise, or to help them manage their emotions? So before I jump into some tips for managing emotions, jump into that chat area and let me know, are there things that you do right now to help support compromises while kids are working on projects, help them discuss or share their position or opinion, or maybe even help manage their emotions?
Great question. I know a few teachers that we work like doing student roles and then
Mhm.
switching student roles and sort of talking about the experience after of like what it means to be that role and how it made them feel.
Mhm.
So that's one thing we've definitely heard from educators that we work with.
Great.
I think discussion questions are also a big one. We have an SEL checklist
Oh, nice.
um, that we use with a few of our activities, which I think are just nice to help guide sort of that discussion on how you think it made somebody else feel and thinking about other people's emotions as well.
Great. And if there's any others that pop into the chat, you're welcome to shout them out before we jump in.
Yes, Jennifer said feeling charged. That's a good one.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, so having visuals or having prompts, you might pull in some emojis here to have kids, right, point to different things. So, as we talk about managing emotions, having students take a moment for identifying feelings, naming those feelings is important. And it could range widely, especially if kids are working on projects that they're very passionate about, or that they have a challenging moment, or they're working together as a group and things are going great or things are not going so great. So, having students take a moment for identifying feelings might include a call out where they share their excitement or their frustration or their confusion or their curiosity about something. And none of these are good or bad feelings, but there are feelings that students might have that may change. So, doing a feelings check in can help students really manage their emotions. And sometimes when we use that term manage emotions, and you'll see that pulled into the framework, it seems like we're trying to take control, right? But it's really about managing our emotions, identifying them, being able to say, this is how I feel and why, right? So having more control doesn't mean that we're changing or pivoting, right, with how we feel necessarily, but that we're taking in a moment to acknowledge that, name it, and then use that information to move forward. Now, anytime students are working on something new, working through a challenge or with partners, right, their feelings may change. And so having this as part of your commitment within a STEM lesson to say, this is a point where I feel kids might be getting a little bit frustrated. So here's a moment that I want to just mark in my plan that I'm going to want to stop and maybe use a prompt with them. So if you are finding that students are feeling a little frustrated with a task, frustrated with their peers, maybe frustrated with you, you might decide to bring in a few cool down techniques. It might use one of the sentence starters on this list, like, let's pause for a moment and then regroup. Or let's take that moment. Everyone take a moment, and that might be different with different groups. If you are working remotely, it might be, okay, everyone, let's take a moment. And that might include putting up a quick song on the screen and everyone going off to do their walk around their space for a minute or two before they came back. If you were with us for the last webinar I did with the folks here, we talked about brain breaks, right? So this could kind of come into your cool down techniques. It might include a let's regroup or let's take a timeout. And all of these things are ways to really get students to focus in on how they're feeling at that moment, manage their emotions, and then get ready to keep moving, right? And keep going on. Now, the fifth one on our,
We just had a
Did you want
few
to?
people share. Yeah, I was just going to chime in to share a couple others who had written in the chat. Anna said that during her morning meetings, kids share how they're feeling before class. Rebecca had a great one. Her students use a self-report survey that includes the opportunity to reflect on feelings they had before, during, and after an assignment. So checking in at multiple points. And then Natalie, there's one more, said that she used this feedback as the sharing section of the class to see what went well and identify where improvements could be made.
Love that. And yeah, you have, your students, you might have them take a moment to write something down, record a video, draw a picture, circle the emoji. So there's lots of ways to do this. And you might have a couple of these cool down techniques in your back pocket to say, okay, I know this might be, right? I anticipate this might be a moment, but if you don't anticipate that being a moment, when you might need to pause with your group, having that in your back pocket to say, okay, this is what we do when this happens and this is happening. So let's go do this, right? And have that moment to do a little bit of a cool down. Now, our number 5 on the list of ways to prioritize SEL in the STEM classroom, I gave a sneak peek to a couple of these on my blog announcement about this webinar, is using questions to encourage reflection. Now, reflection is a big part of our own self-assessment. It's our own opportunity to check in on where we're at, to see what our perspective is and maybe share that with another child, right? So a classmate, let them know how we're feeling. And so there's a few reflection questions that you can try out. I'll share a few with you, but it's really about that self-assessment, the opportunity for students to take a moment, jot down, record, share with someone sitting next to them. Maybe it's something they revisit a month later or at the end of the school year for an activity they did in the beginning of the school year to see their own growth as well. Now, this also might connect to self-regulation too. So not just taking stock, but also building some of the behaviors that we might need students to reflect on, right, as they are growing in their own progress. And so as this relates specifically to the STEM classroom, this goes alongside some of the specific challenges students might face that might feel new, that might be different than they experience in other parts of the day. So although you might have a child that is able to self-regulate really well throughout the school day, if they're coming into a program that has a different structure, it's a different set of classmates that they're not used to working with, or maybe is just in a different kind of routine. This is something that might be a priority for you as well. Now, a big part of SEL is empathy and understanding other people's positions, their experiences, right? What their perspective is on a situation. So by having students share their reflections, it might open up their eyes a bit to what other classmates are feeling, are experiencing. So here's a couple pause and reflect questions. How did you feel about this activity? What was fun about today? What parts of today's lesson felt hard? How would you change today's activity? And what would you like to do again? Now, for all of these, there's no one answer. There's no right answer. Your kids might be a little concise with their response, but it's not a yes or no type of response. And you, of course, can tailor these to the other types of activities that you have set up. So you could be really specific. How would you change fill in the blank about today's activity, right? So what was fun about this part of today? right? How did you feel about this activity when I asked you to do that? So you can really customize these for your group as well. Now, as we look at all of these ways to prioritize SEL in the STEM classroom, I always love sharing action items that are framed this way, especially because everyone here today is coming in with a little bit of a different perspective, right? So you want to think to yourself, it's Thursday, so maybe your this week is really next week, and it's almost the end of October, so maybe your this month is November. But what we're asking here is for you to say, what can you do this week that shows you are prioritizing SEL? What can you do in November that shows that this is an integrated part of your planning for your future STEM lessons? And this year, what do you hope to see? What are you hoping that your students will be able to do when they're working together? What might they come to you with a reflection that they've had before they've even been prompted? So all things to consider as we're moving forward from this conversation today. Now, we'll have time at the end for some Q&A, but I want to make sure that there's time for Lauren to show you some of the awesome ways that you can put these ideas of SEL in your classroom into action. So I'm going to go ahead and step back. And I don't know, Lauren, are you going to share your screen or you want me to advance for you?
Yes, I'm going to share my screen because I'm going to show the lesson activity pack that we have as well.
Great.
Awesome. Perfect. So I'm going to hop into our deck here and just talk a little bit about, for context, what we do here at Unruly Splats. So we are all about combining STEM and playfulness, and we're all about embracing being silly, and that naturally encourages a lot of SEL moments. And so you'll see here how it works is we have the physical splat options, which is the little floor pads you see there on the screen at the bottom. And those are all student controlled. So students use block-based coding in an app similar to, if you're familiar with Scratch or code.org, any of the block-based coding. So they can completely control what the splats do, make them light up and make sounds, and they sense when they're stomped on, and collect points so that students can create active games. So some of the most popular games that we've seen students create are things like whack-a-mole, relay races, dance games, and naturally that creates situations in which there'll be a little bit of friendly competition. And so it's great to just keep those SEL questions in mind. So I'm going to go into our next slide here to just show you how they work.
Here we go. 2, ready.
I'm going to share my sound because I don't think I did that before we get started. I've made that mistake before. Here we go again.
Go.
So this was at a school in Florida last month. All the students were wearing masks. And this was an activity that she had actually done in her virtual STEM camp over the summer, where students used a system called MIDI, where you can create a note sound that correlates to a number. And so they can actually code the splats to make a certain sound. And if I actually go back in my slides here, you can see on the iPad screen there on the left-hand side, those are virtual splats. So we actually have an app where you can code the virtual splats and it works just like the physical splats. So we have a ton of virtual options. So now I'm going to hop out and just show you our social emotional learning pack. So this was something that was requested by a lot of our educators who were already working with us because splats naturally kind of lead to SEL conversations. We wanted to build something that specifically called out ways in which you can facilitate that conversation in a natural way. So we came up with 4 activities. They're right here. And each one is a little different. We have a debugging one. We have one that's based off of the classic would you rather icebreaker game. We have one that's sort of similar to a Go Fish, and then one that's basically a puzzles game. So each one creates sort of very specific circumstances which really allow for students to work together through situations and collaborate together as a team. So for example, this one is the debugging game, and you'll notice that we have an option for you to just download the code, so it doesn't have to be related to STEM at all. Monica mentioned earlier that it can be something totally different. So even though this is a STEM product, and we definitely encourage students learning how to use block-based coding and how it works, this activity pack specifically doesn't require to code at all. And we understand that a lot of the teachers that we work with are also still new to coding themselves, and so you'll notice on the previous page, we have a code source download. So you can just download the code and then actually play the game. So because it is based in the SEL framework, we do have a self-checklist here. We have some questions that you can use to spark discussion, and then just kind of teaching them how you elaborate on those feelings. And so this is really a great way. We have one for each activity in this pack. For you to spark those SEL discussions before, during, and after the activity. So I'm going to pop back into the slides here and talk a little bit about how we've aligned to the SEL framework. Oops. So with each of our activities, we try and focus around two key questions. Did you have fun, and did you learn something? And if the answer to either of these questions is no, then we want to figure out what went wrong along the way. And with each of our activities, we have a social emotional learning sort of letter that kind of explains our philosophy around this, but really the goal of this activity pack specifically is to get the students collaborating, having fun together, and learning something in the end. And maybe that's just learning something about each other and how each other thinks and the different perspectives that Monica was talking about. So a lot of times, students will have different ideas, especially with one of the puzzle games that we have. It's all about trial and error. So you'll get different student perspectives, and it's their job sort of to work together as a team to figure out what the solution is. And we are definitely rooted in the SEL framework that Monica was talking about again. And it's those sort of 5 key points: the self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. So some of the key questions that we talk about, what's tricky for me? What tools are available to help? Should I ask my teammate for help? What's working and what's not? How have I seen other people handle this problem? These are some of the questions that students should be asking themselves as they go through these activities. And so I already showed you this part, but this is just to say, if you're not familiar with block coding, that's totally okay. This is still something that you can do with your students by just downloading the code. And as I mentioned, we also have a great virtual option. So virtual splats are great for cross-curricular STEM still, SEL, and collaboration, and also as a way to get students physically active while they're at home. We have a whole pack that's dedicated to get students up and moving, doing jumping jacks and air punches, even though they don't have physical splats. So I'll show you sort of what that looks like. This is our app. It works on any Chrome browser with a laptop, and we also have an iOS app. So if you just go to the Apple Store and search Unruly Splats, it will be there for you to check out. So this is one of my favorite games, and it's sort of one that a lot of people are familiar with, the Would You Rather. And it really, in essence, is just a basic voting machine game. But the purpose of this specific version of Would You Rather is to break students out into smaller groups. It could be even breaking students, the class into 2, but it is a group, and whichever group can come to a consensus on what they're going to vote on in the Would You Rather, gets to play their game first. And so it is kind of creating these situations in where students will have to work together and work through maybe disagreements or different perspectives. But the goal of it is to get students working together and agreeing on what they're going to be voting on. So I'll show you a little bit of what that looks like in our app. I'm just going to pop into here. So this is our Unruly app, and you can see the code. I'll zoom in a little bit. how it works is that if you were doing this with a virtual class, you could share the code on the screen just to see what it looks like. And anybody who, say we're voting on, oh, this was a student suggestion. Would you rather be able to talk to animals or speak every language in the entire world? I love that one. So, and there was actually some disagreement among our team too, which was fun. So how it works is you're going to be using 5 splats for this activity, and splats 1 and 2 are collecting votes for A and B, and splats 1 and 2 are collecting votes for A, and splats 3 and 4 are collecting votes for B. And the reason why we have 2 splats collecting votes is because you'll see in just a second, when I press it, it's going to light up 1 LED each time you press it. And then so if there's 50 or 14 LEDs on a splat. And so if you have more than 14 students in your class, there's room for overflow on the second splats. And then splat number 5 is what we're going to press to get our answer to see what the final tally is. So let's give it a go, shall we? If you want to, write us in the chat. Let me know, would you rather be able to speak to animals or be able to speak any language in the world? And we'll actually do this live so you can see how it works. So write us in the chat and let me know. Maybe Monica, you can just tell me sort of what people say.
We've got in any language. Now we've got in animals.
Okay. So I'm going to say any language is B, and
2 more animals. Ooh, yeah, 2 more animals and 1 more any language.
Awesome.
Cool. I think we've got 2 more any languages here. I think I see one on the list there.
Okay.
I think my vote is for animals. I'm not sure. This is a tough one.
This is a tough one.
How do you know you've got a good would you rather if it takes a minute for you to make a decision?
Exactly. And this was a student suggested one, so I love that too. Okay, so we're gonna press on splat number 5 now. The tally. So 7, I have 7 for animals and 5 for speaking any language. So that's just kind of how it works. And this code does look a little big, but really you can simplify it and boil it down just to have a really simple, when splat 1 is pressed, light it up a certain color and then change the score. And then when splat 2 is pressed, light that up a different color. And so there's tons of different ways that we've seen educators get super creative with this, but it's just a way really to get students collaborating on what they're going to vote on. So that's how it works. I'm going to show one more game too. This one's one of my favorites. This is from our Icebreakers pack called Monster Maker. So the code is very, very simple. It also has a code download, so you don't have to worry about it at all. But this one requires students to get into groups, and each one will have to hide their sound because they're going to be assigned a random animal sound. And then each student is also assigned either a top, middle, or bottom of their monster. And so they'll hop into a Google Doc and use the scribble tool in a shared Google Doc to start creating their monster. And so maybe one student gets a chicken and they're drawing the head, and then another student gets an elephant and they're drawing the middle, and then another student gets a dog and they're drawing the bottom. And so in the end, when you press OK, you get a really silly looking monster, sort of like this. And it's just a really fun activity for students to get to know one another, to work together on something, and to laugh about it after, and maybe talk about their favorite parts of the game or the things that they had trouble with if they don't feel comfortable drawing. But this is another great activity that's pretty easy to put together for students, whether you're in person or virtual or some sort of hybrid as well. So lots of different options for coding and playing. You can code at home and play at school. If you're hybrid, code at home and play at home. If you're totally virtual, or of course, coding at school and playing at school. Ideally, if your school's open, that's great. And one last note, we are having a really fun challenge going on right now, the Fall Fitness Challenge. And oh, I forgot to include a photo of it, but we are giving the winner a golden splat. So we've actually spray painted a splat gold, and the winning school will get to take it home. So this is a really fun way to get students in your school just sort of up and active and moving, regardless of whether they are virtual or in school. We have sort of a weekly activity outline. So each week we'll focus on a specific activity, and each activity does include both a coding and a physical activity component. And then we have a whole scoring system. So, we take the average score of a class so that it's fair depending on whether your class is, small or large. So there's going to be activities like air punches and push-ups and burpees. And lots of modifications as well for students who maybe aren't able to do those activities. But it's just a great way to get students engaged and active, especially when they're at home. So if you're interested in learning more about that, definitely head to our website and check that out. It's in the top banner of our website. And if you go to the lesson plan section of our website under Learn More, you'll be able to download our entire SEL activity pack and also try it out for free with our app that's available on a Chrome browser or on an iPad. And I think that's it. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen here so that we can hear from anybody who might have some questions.